Brandon Ingram and the New Orleans Pelicans has now been mentioned as a team to maybe keep an eye out for in the Jimmy Butler trade nonsense and drama that's going on. We're going to talk a little bit about that. Plus, Bruce Brown could get a potential buyout from the Toronto Raptors and how that could affect the buyout market. Plus, the Detroit Pistons have kind of released what they want to do with their cap space and the plans there. We're going to talk about all that plus more right after this.
Welcome to the number one place for your daily basketball news and analysis, NBA Central.
What's going on, basketball fans? Welcome to another episode of NBA Central, your number one spot for everything basketball related. I'm the host here, Hayes, but more importantly, you guys can follow the channel at NBA Central Pod on every social media platform we happen to be on. With that said, let's go ahead and get into the content for today. So this one comes from ESPN's Brian Windhorst in regards to Brandon Ingram. He says this: the Hawks could be interested in Brandon Ingram, a name that has popped up recently in regards to that. Specifically, keep an eye out on the Atlanta Hawks. They just lost their star wing, Jalen Johnson, for the season. They may start to get interest in making a move, especially for Brandon Ingram. Ingram has not been in trade rumors for most of the season, and is probably because of a number of things. Teams don't want to take on his $36 million, and also he's played less than 20 games this season. Now, they also went on to say that the New Orleans Pelicans are not against potentially getting involved in a Brandon Ingram for Jimmy Butler swap as well. So it seems like the Pelicans are trying to push in their chips to see where it is. The Hawks are also a team that reportedly is interested in being a third team in a deal that includes Bradley Beal or some other things. So it seems like both these teams are keen on kind of getting involved and active at the trade deadline. Here's what I'll say. Brandon Ingram makes sense for both teams. If you look at the Atlanta Hawks and what they lost in Jalen Johnson, the fact that it is a one-year rental in regards to Brandon Ingram, that they don't necessarily have to attach long-term money to it, Jalen Johnson comes back, so no harm, no foul, right? We know that the Atlanta Hawks are incentivized to go ahead and fight for their playoff and play-in seeding this year rather than tank by any stretch of the imagination, because they do not own their own destiny with their first-round pick. That's going to the Spurs regardless. So, you know, the Hawks falling out of the play-in, playoffs, whatever it is, that actually doesn't really benefit them any. They gain no benefit from that at all. So because of that, it makes some sense if they wanted to get aggressive and try to go after Brandon Ingram. Now, what can they do to get there? Bogdan Bogdanovic's contract gets them part of the way there. They also have an expiring contract in Clint Capella as well that they could look to move in that type of move. And between those two contracts, that basically gets you there. The question is would the Pelicans bite on that for Brandon Ingram, a player that earlier in the season, it was reported that they wanted multiple first-round picks back if it came down to that? That's the question that has to be asked here by the Atlanta Hawks, that they have to figure out on what they want to do with their contracts going forward. But when you have expiring contracts, when you have a player that you just lost that is so key to how good you have been, and you are incentivized to keep the thing afloat, right, and to go ahead and fight and compete for it, you look at it, the Atlanta Hawks, they have the Lakers pick, right? But again, that's outside of their control. That's coming via the Pelicans. So because of that, I mean, they very well could and probably should go ahead and look to make moves. Maybe they even move that Lakers pick to try to at least get something back for Brandon Ingram. And then if need be, if Brandon Ingram fits in, maybe they can look to bring him back, right? But Brandon Ingram is a player that I would not be surprised if a lot of teams look at how they're going to, if he can help their team, considering that the Pelicans, they just want to move off the contract. It's a expiring contract. They want something back rather than let that expire for anything. And the thing with Brandon Ingram is he's a player that's fit in into so many different roles with that Pelicans team and has been productive in every one of them. Shooting guard, small forward, power forward. He's been productive at every role that the Pelicans over the last few years have asked him to play, and that makes a lot of sense for the Atlanta Hawks considering some things. So keep a lookout on the Hawks to get involved in the Brandon Ingram thing. But then we also heard that the Pelicans could look to get involved in the Jimmy Butler trade if need be. And here's the thing. Would Brandon Ingram actually make sense for the Miami Heat? You got Tyler Hero who's growing. You, of course, got Bam there. You got Khalil Ware who you're getting more minutes from and trying to open for. Would Brandon Ingram make some sense there? Like I said, when you look at it, about 40% of Brandon Ingram's offense, about 30% of his offense comes from three-point range. About 30% of it comes from mid-range, and about 20% of it comes from as well, down low. So when you look at that, it makes some sense for maybe Brandon Ingram can help even that Miami Heat team. Now, again, I don't know if the Heat if that's what they necessarily want. They do have a date in mind. They want to be active in the summer of 2026, so they don't want money that goes past that date. So then you're looking at Brandon Ingram being an expiring contract and one that you're probably not looking to bring back. And that's what you have to ask yourselves if you're the Miami Heat or the Atlanta Hawks. And here's what I'll say. Makes some sense for both teams. We'll see. But another player that the Hawks definitely could be interested in, but seems like the Nuggets are going to be, is that Bruce Brown is a potential buyout candidate with the Toronto Raptors. It seems like there is some talk around there. If they cannot move him, then he could get bought out. This comes from Jake L. Fisher. If Bruce Brown gets bought out, he would have a major market. A team that is definitely curious if he's going to be available in the buyout market is his old team, the Denver Nuggets. The Nuggets are very aware that they would need to make several moves to get under the first apron to be able to sign Bruce Brown, who makes north of the mid-level. Any team that is in the first apron right now is ineligible to sign someone from the buyout market who makes north of what the mid-level exception is. So that makes some listen, the Nuggets would make sense. You look at how they've lost role players over the years. I think they realize how that's hurt them over the years as well in the number of role players that they've lost since they won their title. Being able to bring Bruce Brown back to that team makes a whole hell of a lot of sense. But make sure Bruce Brown, as a player that necessarily hasn't had the best stats since leaving Denver, but he's still a guy that can be very, very productive, especially when he's able to play off stars. And a team like the Atlanta Hawks, who we just mentioned, could be one of those teams that are interested. The Philadelphia 76ers could be a team that's interested, even though their record isn't necessarily the best, even though it's improving and they're close to making the play-in, things like that. But I do think that Brown is going to have a really robust market when it comes to buyout markets in the NBA if he is ended up bought out by the Toronto Raptors. We've seen what Bruce Brown has done before on both sides of the ball. And like I said, while his stats haven't jumped out the gym at you or anything out the stat sheet at you since he left Denver, he did have 12 points per game with Portland in 2023-24 before he was traded to Toronto, where he had 9.6 and 9.1 so far this year. He hasn't started any games, has only played 14 games this season. But if he's bought out, I do expect Bruce Brown to have a pretty decent market when it's all said and done as well. So look out for that. Bruce Brown's a nice veteran role player that can definitely help you. Let me know what you guys think on Bruce Brown and his potential market if he is bought out. Next up, everybody's been kind of wondering what the Pistons are going to do. They have $14 million in cap space right now. Initially coming into the season, it was rumored that they were more than willing to play third team to acquire bad salary to get some draft picks back and absorb things into that salary cap space. But now it looks like maybe they have some different thoughts on it as well. Let's go ahead and get into it with this one. This one comes as well from Jake L. Fisher, who says this. The Detroit Pistons are seeking a future first-round pick as a facilitator using their $14 million cap space in a multi-team trade scenario. Teams are looking to dump unwilling salaries to duck below the luxury tax threshold, and the second apron have circled with interest. It makes a lot of sense, right? But you look at their progress as being a playoff team, right? Right as of right now, and if they're able to take some salary on and dump it to gain some assets, that's great. Like the Detroit Pistons have never really been a big free agent destination. So they typically have to draft their players, right? And they've seen Jaden Ivey go down with injury, things like that. So, of course, there was some thought, hey, are they going to be more so looking to add at the trade deadline as far as an actual productive player to help them do some things and continue their fight to make the playoffs? Or are they more likely to kind of keep absorbing some money, absorb some bad salary, gain some assets so they continue as they're still a team that's very much so in rebuild mode? And that's the question that you have here for them, right? I think overall, the Pistons sit in a place where they're in one of the best places in the league. They have flexibility. And that's what's something that brings so much value in the league when you have so much flexibility to choose your destiny. And that's where the Detroit Pistons are right now. And they earn that. They deserve that. And so we'll see what ultimately ends up with them. But as of right now, we'll see. Now, the two players that are kind of leading right now the trade talks and are some of the bigger dominoes that teams are waiting to fall, of course, are De'Aaron Fox and Jimmy Butler, right? And it seems like both teams right now are kind of at a stalemate. The Sacramento Kings do want a win-now player back. They're still trying to win now. They can take some future assets, but if they can get some young players, they can. One of the teams that were mentioned as De'Aaron Fox's preferred destination is the San Antonio Spurs, and reportedly, the Sacramento Kings love Castle. That they want Stephen Castle back in any move that they're prepared to ask for that, in any move that would send De'Aaron Fox to his reported preferred destination with the San Antonio Spurs. And here's what I'll say: that's smart. That's what you should do. The Kings, much like I said with the Pistons, are never really a free agent destination. So because of that, you have to draft your players and develop your players. That's why them losing out and possibly moving De'Aaron Fox is such a big deal, right? So if he wants to go play alongside Wemby, that's great. That's great. But they should be holding out and try to get Castle in those talks back. Sure, the San Antonio Spurs have first-round picks they can throw. They got young, productive players that they can throw at it. But if they can get Stephon Castle back in that move, I just think that that's smart for what they're going to do, right? And I think that's the thing. Now, there are some that think that this could end up going to the offseason. And we've heard some more details as well that the Kings are actually the ones that kind of jump-started this recent talk about a potential trade. It wasn't necessarily De'Aaron Fox requesting a trade, which I think was initially kind of the thought there. So we'll see what the future holds for. But I think that the Kings are right to hold a value because they have an additional year, and they don't have to necessarily make a pull the trigger move at the trade deadline if they don't get a deal that they think is fair, right? Now, the Miami Heat are in a different position. For their team chemistry, for all the drama going on with Jimmy Butler, they may need to move Jimmy Butler right now at this trade deadline. And because of that, that's where it sits in a place where what's going to happen with Jimmy Butler. And it seems like, I don't know, man. We heard that the Pelicans, what I said earlier, are willing to get involved, but it seems like right now that Jimmy Butler's situation is just still a mess and still does not have a lot of clarity around the league because the teams that are really interested in him are either second tax apron teams where it's going to take a lot of teams to get involved to get a deal done, or, he doesn't want to go to certain teams that have already threatened that he's going to not pick up his option or pick up his option, which could maybe even be more terrifying for some teams. So it seems like these are still two of course, the biggest chips left to fall at the trade deadline. And what happens here could dictate what teams do with their assets in other places. Teams like the Detroit Pistons, who I just mentioned, could be waiting to hold out to see if they're going to be a team that's a third team in a deal that can absorb some salary and thus get some assets back, right? They're a team that could be looking to wait. The Indiana Pacers are another team that's reportedly interested in getting in the mix here if they can, as are the Atlanta Hawks. So I think that a lot of things are kind of waiting right now. Even the Golden State Warriors, who may be back in or out or whatever else it is. So this trade deadline is going to be fun. We will have a trade deadline live stream special, so make sure you guys are in tune with us for that. Make sure you're following the channel at NBA Central Pod. You can send us any feedback, questions, comments, concerns, NBA Central Show at gmail.com. And then lastly, if you want to leave a text message and our voicemail for the mailbag, the number to do so, 773-270-2799. We're the number one spot for everything basketball related. And I'll see you guys the next time I feel like making a video. Probably tomorrow. Peace, y'all.
This has been a presentation of the Breaks Media.